When we talk about the portrayal of racism in Hollywood films, we usually don't think about racism in sci-fi movies. Racism can be defined as discrimination against people of a different race based on the belief that one's race is superior. There are sci-fi movies that have used animals, sci-fi movies that have used mutants, and sci-fi movies that have used aliens to symbolize the racism that takes place in real life. While they all may not completely resemble the experience of racism against other human beings, they definitely depict the negativity of discrimination. District 9 is a sci fi movie that shows its characters as victims of alien discrimination after they arrive on Earth. Although it is difficult to simulate how it feels to be a victim of racism, especially when the victims are aliens, District 9 uses post apartheid Johannesburg in South Africa to set the scene for its audience without actually saying the phrase aliens equals black Africans. At the same time, District 9 can be seen as a racist film because of its stereotypical portrayal of black men as thugs, taking advantage of the alien victims.
To gain some insight on racism in Hollywood and film in general, let's first discuss a brief history of race in film and how it has evolved over time. Since District 9 takes place in South Africa, we'll focus mainly but not only on black representation in film. We know that there are three key points in time that changed race and racism forever: slavery, colonialism, and of course immigration. However, even when things such as slavery were done away with, racism very obviously still existed, and the film industry is no exception. In films like The Little Colonel and Gone with the Wind, many of the first black actors in film began as Toms and Mammies in the 1930s, otherwise known as those of color who worked under whites. This superiority construct of whites over blacks was a result of black actors entering a white-dominated industry while racism was still very prevalent in America. Over the years, though, race representation in film among all people of color has been an ever-changing dynamic. We know about blaxploitation in the 1970s, in which films and television series exploited black popular culture for profit, most notable being the movie Shaft. As a film about a black detective fighting the Italian mob, this movie nearly defined the blaxploitation subgenre. Later, we see the emergence of black independent films creating the unique, true black culture in film for the first time in the 1980s. These independent films are where many began to see black culture for what it truly is and not a fabrication of what whites thought it should be. Something to note about this evolution of black culture in film was best said by writer Ada Gay Griffin in Ellis Cashmore's America's Paradox, stating that black culture is the product of an ongoing struggle between the extremes of defiance and assimilation, of resistance and complacency. These wise words can be clearly applied to District 9, in which race is stripped of color, but instead is a political and social battle of power and hierarchy between the refugee aliens and humans on Earth.
District 9 is inspired by events in apartheid-era South Africa, in which over 60,000 people of color were forced out of their homes in District 6, Cape Town. From then on, District 6 became designated as a whites-only area by the government, while the non-whites were forced into government housing. Similarly, in the beginning of the film, we find the government-hired company Multinational United, or MNU, in the process of removing the aliens, or prawns as they are derogatorily referred to, from a slum called District 9. In order to try to convince the aliens to relocate, government agent Vicus van der Merwe bribes them with cat food. The derogatory usage of the word prawn is taken from the Parktown prawn, which is an insect native to the Johannesburg area that is viewed as a pest by the residents. This and the bribing scene immediately tell the audience how the aliens are perceived by the characters in the film. We also see them treated very cruelly and or spoken of disparagingly by both blacks and whites. Later in the film, we see Vicus begin a transformation into a prawn due to an accident. The MNU then proceeds to conduct experiments on him before he manages to escape. A fake news story regarding his affliction is spread, and he becomes a wanted fugitive. After he is hunted down, the antagonist holds him at gunpoint while expressing contempt for what he is becoming, referring to him as a half-breed. Despite being a film about racism and xenophobia, there isn't a whole lot of representation of people of color, and some of what's there is not entirely positive. In particular, Nigerians are depicted as cannibalistic, unrepentant thugs, and the black South Africans seem to fade into the background for the most part. As this film is both written and directed by white people, and features a white protagonist, it would not qualify as black culture, according to Ellis Cashmore, who posits that all forms of black popular culture, quote, are created by blacks in concert with whites and consumed in the main by whites, unquote. Though Cashmore is discussing this within the context of American popular culture, it can certainly apply to post-apartheid South Africa.
The film District 9 has an interesting perspective of prejudices that erupt when humanity is forced to face adversity or introduced to a different culture. In this instance, the hypothetical prejudices are between humans and aliens and correlate with the racist ideology in our society. Although the word racism would not exactly be accurate since the discrimination is not of the human race, similarities are apparent. This movie is a direct reference to apartheid that took place through the 18 years between 1976 and 1994 in South Africa, as well as the post-apartheid era. Apartheid, being the African word meaning separateness, is the purest example of racism. Similar to the film, races were divided into different yet geographically specific locations. Uncoincidentally, blacks and coloreds were living near slums, near gold mines, working for lowered wages. As well, the segregation was economically motivated, so citizenship, political statuses, and rights were only for the whites. The government instigated this inequality purposely for the exploitation of blacks. A fictional relationship between aliens and humans in District 9 was able to make an abstract portrayal of our actual history. Thus, the racism in the film, from false propaganda with prejudice agendas to brutal police treatment, was important to point out flaws of society, and even to this very day. Throughout history, whether it be Nationalist Party in South Africa or Hitler's Nazi propaganda, used as an invaluable tool to push political agendas fueled by racism. The National Party used it to advertise fear of the mass population or refugees entering South Africa to the minority whites and Nazi dehumanized Jewish people and their culture with false propaganda. These same tactics were evident throughout the movie. The racism in the film was necessary to represent prejudice ideologies, encouraged by economic motives to profit off extraterrestrial technology. The government even backed race-baiting propaganda. Being a rather leftist-based movie, there was not much unnecessary racism, and the director is a well-known progressive and outspoken over controversies involving racism to this present day.
The science fiction film District 9 is portrayed by its director, Neil Blomkamp, as a film that is designed to highlight how humans exhibit racism and practice economic exploitation. These behaviors have lasting effects on society as a whole and have wide-spreading implications. The alien presence within the film is classified as a foreign nuisance to the native population of Johannesburg, South Africa, where the film is centrally located, spreading and disrupting the native populace way of life. The tone of the film shows how highlighting differences and economically exploiting individuals leads to the dehumanization of an oppressed population. Many humans within the film do not see the aliens as exploited refugees from a dying planet. It's easy to disassociate from identification with the aliens because they are not associated or reminiscent of any human culture or race. However, in reality, the aliens are in effect enslaved by Multinational United, a corporation that provides them with life essentials in exchange for the monopolization of their alien technology so they may profit from it. Rather, the alien presence is looked at as an unnecessary expense that money and resources are being used on that could otherwise go to help people of the human race. This is not unlike our current world, where we see refugees being oppressed and exploited for simply seeking a better life and more opportunities for themselves and their families. In Chapter 13 of Popular Culture A Reader, authors Melvin Oliver and Thomas Shapiro speak on the struggles racialized people face. Civil rights struggles for racialized peoples always had ramifications beyond enfranchisement within the nation-state. These struggles were met with state violence precisely because mobilizations by racialized peoples not only named the contradiction between the promise of political emancipation and the conditions of racialized segregation and economic exploitation, but they reveal the racial exclusions upon which capitalism and neocolonialism are founded. So, it can be said that the effects of racism and economic exploitation on society leads to widespread segregation, dehumanization, and hatred of individuals, and that are different from the dominant culture and population.
Racism in movies isn't confined to only Hollywood dramas, although they are definitely more obvious and relatable. Sci-fi movies show racism through the discrimination of all types of characters that are different from humans, rather than racism against other humans that are of a different skin color. Sci-fi movies, such as District 9, use aliens on Earth to symbolize that racism is still a major issue around the world. The examples of racism in District 9, even though they are dealing with aliens, are quite relatable for humans that have been treated as if they weren't human at all. The political and social implications in the movie are results of the human versus alien conflict, even though the aliens are only refugees and seek assistance, not world domination. Whether racism is depicted in films, through real life situations, or used in sci fi movies, it is still a major cause of unrest and chaos in the world. It has been over a century since the end of slavery, and our society is still not able to advance past racism in order to promote progress for everyone.